Good afternoon, everyone. This is just a quick reminder, actually. I thought I'd log in today to let you know about police checks. I think with the coronavirus restrictions easing up and flights resuming, that people are going to be more likely to return to the UAE, and perhaps they haven't considered that it's important to conduct a police check before travelling under certain circumstances. For example, if you've lived there, if you've worked there, if you've rented a home, if you've had credit with one of the banks, it's a really good idea to conduct a police check before travelling, just to make sure that no one has inadvertently or deliberately or maliciously taken out a police complaint about you. Now, this would have, if people had done this all along, it would have prevented quite a lot of detentions. So we've seen people detained for their own debts, if they've had any, other people's debts, family members or even friends in some instances. In other cases, we've seen landlords take out complaints that they hadn't paid the rent when they had. We've seen quite a few cybercrime cases that people just simply would not have been aware of. Even Lala Sharavesh, that was a very famous case that we dealt with, I think it was about 1.5 years ago now, but she was arrested on arrival for a post that she'd made on Facebook that was allegedly insulting. But outside the country, she'd made it in England several years before travelling to the UAE, and she was still arrested for it. So it's these, especially cybercrimes, that people need to be careful of because their laws are extraterritorial. So if you've posted something that could be offensive to the government or offensive to a particular individual, you face potential criminal charges on arrival in the UAE, and that's whether you're a tourist or whether you're heading there for work or to live and that you're a resident. For example, if Lala Sharavesh had done a police check before travelling to the UAE, she wouldn't have gone through quite, what was a very, very traumatic experience for her and her daughter. So I think please be mindful, do your police checks in advance, don't travel until you do, and consider that banks could list you an employer, perhaps a landlord, or perhaps someone who doesn't like you. There's always some of those. But I've seen people, especially on the cybercrimes, I'll say it again, people who have made online complaints on Twitter, for example, against a rental car company complaining about their customer service. We've seen someone arrested for, again, rental car companies, hotels, anyone who didn't get a 5-star rating basically has been at risk of a cybercrime violation. In other cases, people who have shared a charity on their Facebook, and it could be a fox hunting charity, I use this example a lot, or it could be any charity that's not registered or recognised by the UAE authorities is considered unlawful to share on your Facebook wall. And again, because the laws are extraterritorial, you could share that post from England or America or some other country, and it could be from years ago, so we're all going to be guilty of this. If you've shared a charity on your social media in the past few years from outside the UAE and it's not registered in the UAE, technically you're in violation of the cybercrime laws. I know they're stupid. However, and largely not policed, but if for some reason someone decides to bring that violation to the attention of authorities, they will actually charge and prosecute you under their cybercrime laws, which can result in hundreds of thousands of dirhams in fines and years in prison. The other thing we have to be mindful of is if we've shared news or press the like button on Twitter or Facebook, liking a news article that perhaps isn't flattering of the UAE government, that is also a violation. So again, they're probably not going to pick up on it and enforce it, but if it's brought to their attention, and it could be by one of your enemies or just someone who doesn't like you, or maybe you're late in your rent or a bill or something like this, if it's brought to their attention by a vindictive party or they happen to see it online, then they can prosecute, and they do. So again, if you've been living in the UAE, or like Lala Sharavesh, And she was reported by someone who took a personal interest in her. So if you have anyone like that potentially on your lines, or you've had dealings with the bank, even if your bank is now in the clear and you're not in debt, it's really important to do that check before you travel. You don't want to get stopped, you don't want to go through the process and potentially be caught in a foreign legal system that is frightening and is noted for human rights violations. So again, do everything that you can to prevent the occurrence happening in the first place. Dubai is done. Yes, best solution, don't travel to the UAE, particularly not at the moment. It's not the most attractive time to travel, period, but certainly now is not. And yes, I mean, a lot of expats who, awful treatment of human beings, yeah, we do see that. A lot of people who live there and travel there obviously want to think the best of the country, and that's fine and that's great. But we shouldn't be blind to the fact that if you happen to be caught up with a false allegation against you, it's an absolute disaster. You know, it's like completely out of a movie. You're locked in a horrendous condition, forced confessions. You're going to be signing documents in Arabic without having been allowed access to a lawyer. You're not going to be allowed to speak with your embassy, and if you do, they really don't want to help. And you can be caught up in a system there for more than a year, as we saw. You know, we've seen with so many cases. You can be caught up in prison without charge, against their own laws. Sorry, there's some background noise. Against their own procedures and protocols that see that if someone has committed a crime, if someone's under investigation, they should be released within a few weeks, providing that they're not going to go ahead and prosecute. But what we see is, you know, people are detained unlawfully against UAE protocols for periods of 1 to 2 years even, and then finally perhaps they're released, acquitted they call it, but were they even charged in the first place? No, they've just been held there on the whim of a prosecutor or someone that has more wasta, more influence over the legal system there. So again, if we run into an Emirati, a prominent Emirati, are we going to be able to get a fair hearing in court in the UAE? That's highly unlikely. Yes, exactly. It's no longer the El Dorado, yes. I mean, there was a time when the UAE was booming. If people went in there and they were involved in property development or, you know, the building of Dubai, basically, if they got in there, they made a lot of money, sure. The ones that managed to get that money out of the country, though, are few. A lot of the time, and I've discussed this in depth as well, the Emiratis viewed the foreigners as resources, that they should come and then contribute and give their labour and their energy and their money and their investment. Should they be able to take that out of the country again? No. In their views, it belonged to the Emirates. And frivolous allegations were made against those foreigners just so that the Emiratis, so that locals could keep that investment and prevent it from leaving the country again. They want it to come in, but they don't want it to go out. So those who did get in, make some money and get out really quickly, well, yes, they were happy. But it was at great risk, and it was at the risk of their freedom. It was at the risk of 40-year sentences for false allegations, for bounce checks that weren't anything to do with anything that they'd done wrong in the past. They were, you know, possibly the company, the local sponsor had caused the situation that caused the checks to bounce, but the foreigner has been held responsible for that. And we've seen people sentenced to 20 years for these bounce checks and another person for 40 years, and they hadn't done anything wrong. The Emiratis simply wanted the money to stay in the country. So be cautious when going to the UAE and thinking that you're going to go there, get rich, take your money out. A lot of people end up losing their entire life savings that they've built outside of the UAE have been lost entirely in the UAE, and they've left the country with nothing, having to start completely fresh again. And these are, 40, 50, 60-year-olds. Their houses, their properties, their inheritances, everything that they and their families have built have been lost because of the decision to go to the UAE. So if you are going to go to the UAE, I think it's very important that you understand to protect your cash. So protect whatever it is that you're bringing to the UAE. You don't want to, bring it there and risk it. If you own a property, it can be easily frozen just because someone takes a false claim against you, a civil matter, and perhaps they have more influence over the judicial system than a foreigner does. So you need to be very careful of that. And if you get embroiled in any kind of legal dispute in the UAE, it's going to cost you a fortune. If it's business, and of course, if you're conducting business, if you're in property development, if you went there to make a fortune and you're involved with high ticket projects, basically, you're going to find that your legal fees are going to be in excess of 1 million dirhams. So, and at the lower kind of levels, if you're accused of, falsely accused, let's say, of drugs or, any cybercrimes, it could be, your legal fees could be 50 to 100,000 US dollars. On the cheaper side, we could be looking at 20, 30,000 US dollars. For most lawyers, this is what they're going to quote. So it's extremely important that you do not get caught up in a foreign legal system where lawyers see foreigners as prey. They want to extract their full life savings, and if you don't have it, they want your parents, your family, they want whatever you can raise. So yeah, so be careful. Hi Laith, when am I back on Twitter? Twitter, yes, my ban. I'm not sure what's going to happen with that, so we'll see, but we'll see. It's not that important, is it? I've got this wonderful phone right here. Okay, let's see if I can see any more of these. Hi Grant, how are you? Thanks for tuning in. Yep. Okay, best solution. Yeah, the ridiculous laws in Dubai, absolutely, Arifa. Yep. Yeah, we have a lot more personal experiences that I want to go through. In fact, I've got a whole list of topics that I want to discuss. We touched on the cybercrime today. That's one of my passions, that cybercrime law, because when I read through it, I thought, who on earth drafted this legislation? Have they thought through what the possible ramifications are? Did they ask themselves, what if this, what if that? It's like they had not thought, how could this legislation that is so vague, how could it possibly be misused? And I thought, well, they must, come on, they're lawyers, they're drafting legislation. They must have some kind of intelligence that's going to go through that process of how this is going to be misused and what protections can we put into that law. And I thought, well, they must have considered that and thought that maybe it works for them or works for the locals, they can misuse it if they want to. But I'd say probably it's just negligent. But the fact that we've analysed it, and even the UAE's law firm, their favourite law firm, one of their favourite law firms, Al Tamimi, has analysed the cybercrime laws and found that, obviously there should be reforms made to these ridiculous laws, but so far I haven't really seen any, and people are still falling victim. We had Scott Richards, an Australian British national. He was arrested for sharing a charity. We've had Lala Sharavish, a great example with the comment on Facebook, Horseface, and we've recently had a couple of Americans arrested on cybercrime allegations made by vindictive people, whether it's an employer or someone who's having a dispute with you for some other reason, finds a way to use the cybercrime laws to just simply harass you. And legal harassment in any country is a big problem. That's the US, it's the UK, but particularly in the UAE, where it's going to cause you much, much more strain than it would in another country and potentially lead to your imprisonment. So let's say you have a dispute with your employer and he's not happy, he doesn't want to pay you your end of service leave or something like this. All he needs to do is go to your Facebook, go to your Twitter and see, well, let's find something that you've done wrong. Perhaps you've criticised the rental car company. Let's find that and let's go and report it. And that's how these laws are manipulated and totally misused. And there's no protection in there for people who are accused of these crimes. And it's wrong. It's led to many arrests and it's led to the abuse of legal process and the abuse of people's rights. So that is one law that I would love to just reform it right now. Yes, and the alcohol license laws are obviously very complicated, and it's the only way I could really describe them, and thanks Steve for bringing it up, is it's legal, it's not legal, or it's legal or it's not legal, and we're not really sure what it is, but you know, it really depends on the person and the moment. So there doesn't seem to be anything followed. People can get arrested at any time for anything. It's kind of if someone's doing something, or they're annoying someone, or someone doesn't like someone, it's also, if they've had a drink, even if it's just one drink, it's a wonderful excuse to arrest that person. And I'll just touch on the Ali Holman case while I'm here, because there was a lot of criticism over that being fake news, but it wasn't. Ali Holman was arrested for the single glass of wine that she had en route on Emirates, and yes, she and the immigration officer, they had an exchange, but she was charged with the alcohol. So it's something that I recommend that people refrain from. I think if anything happens, Jamie Harring was in a bar, for example. Some guy made an allegation that he was rude. He touched his leg accidentally while walking past, and he was charged with alcohol consumption as well. No, Steve, I'll have to say liquor laws are very clear. Get a license and you're okay, except when you're not okay. So we've just had too many people arrested for the consumption of alcohol. Once it's in your body, it's possession of alcohol, and if it's in public, you can be arrested. If it's in private, you can be arrested too, because it's really up to the police and the prosecutor. So stay out of trouble and avoid anything that might lead to your arrest while you're under the influence. I mean, it's not really the greatest advice, is it? And it's still, again, it's not clear, because there are laws that say possession of alcohol will lead to your arrest. Yeah, drink at home safely. Okay. Yeah. Well, I mean, we've had people arrested, usually in bar situations, or mostly in taxis on the way home. If there's anything goes wrong in the taxi, there's an argument about perhaps the taxi driver didn't know where he was going or something like that. Often they're going to get dropped off at the police station on the way home. Yes. So be responsible. You should be okay, sure, but if for whatever reason you happen to be breath tested and there's an alcohol reading, that is a crime. Yep. Hi, Ed. So yes, we've covered the cybercrimes, we've covered a little bit of the alcohol, which is a very complicated topic, but ultimately I want to get the point across that you should conduct a police check before going to the UAE if you think that there's any possibility whatsoever that you might face arrest or a false allegation, anything at all. The same goes for Interpol. If you've had a debt in the past or you still have a debt, you should probably check with Interpol, and you can't see that online obviously, but even though other crimes are seen online, you won't be able to see this, so that has to be done formally. It takes about minimum of 30 days, but up to 4 months to get that knowledge back. But also important if you're going to be travelling, because we have had people arrested for debt in European countries, and it's been a nightmare. Okay, well, thanks for joining in, everyone. I'm probably going to do another one in a moment. I want to touch on the women's topic again. It's been a while since I've discussed a little bit of Latifa case, but also what's been happening in other cases that have been focused on women, so I'll talk about that. Any happening further to the diplomacy side? Well, the UAE and Israel have already been largely in bed together anyway. And especially on the intelligence side of things, UAE royals and business people, they've all been using Israeli operatives to spy, and there's all sorts of diplomacy that had already been going on. So this isn't really changing much at all. It's just making it a bit public. Yeah, Steve, golden rule is be sensible. Yeah, sure, be sensible. You can be arrested in most countries for being inebriated in public. Yeah, that's absolutely true. But in the UAE, you can be arrested simply for having alcohol in your system, even if that's only, you've had that much. There's no minimum limit. There's no 0.05. There's no... So you can be arrested no matter what, and people have been. So yes, if you're sensible, you'll probably get away with it, but also be aware of that fact. Yeah, hi, Laith. A 16-year-old was arrested and jailed for supposedly giving an Emirati the finger. This is nothing unique, actually, and sadly this happens all the time. And I have had teenagers arrested for the same thing as well. Rude finger gestures, or perhaps they've emailed something or said something on social media. Yeah, and this happens a lot in traffic. So I had a Danish client quite a few years ago. He's a friend now, but he had an issue with someone who had cut him off in a very, very dangerous way in the car. And he went to the police station to report it, but the other guy got to the police station faster and reported him, saying that he had given the middle finger to this other person, which he hadn't. My client was a police officer, actually, but a Danish man. He's very, he doesn't do that. So anyway, the other guy got in there first, made the complaint, a woman actually, made the complaint against him, and because she got in there faster, it was a she got in there faster to the police station to report him for apparently being rude to her, he was the one that was arrested, and he was absolutely furious. When he finally, it took him quite a while to recover from that, actually. It was a really traumatic experience. He hadn't done anything wrong. And the woman just went to the police station first to make the first complaint, because whoever gets in first gets treated differently. They get treated like their word is the Holy Grail. Yeah, absolutely. It's not all, definitely it's not all Emiratis at all. Emiratis against foreigners, not by any means. They're the minority of the population. So yes, Steve, I agree. It's expat against expat. It's, the misuse of laws is not only by Gulf nations, it's by Pakistanis, Indians, Westerners, absolutely. And the same goes for the family law. And divorce law and everything else. I mean, you'll see people who are coming from England, they'll head over to the UAE, and that married couple decides to divorce in the UAE, and both people will use these laws in the most horrendous way, things that they wouldn't do back in England if they were divorcing. They do in the UAE because they can. So, yes, absolutely. I mean, we see terrible behaviour in the UAE because it's allowed, and that's the issue. It's if people are allowed to abuse the legislation, if they're able to use laws. Sorry, I'm just getting distracted. If they're able to misuse a legal system, they most certainly will. So it's a terrible situation, and you can only blame the Emirati legislation for that. They obviously need to clean it up if they want to attract expats to go and live and contribute to their society. Then they need to offer them protections, the same protections that we get a limited amount of, at least in the UK and the US. People simply shouldn't be able to abuse the laws to the extent that they are, including a witness statement being enough to secure a conviction. So you said before that someone wrongfully accused your son, was it, of the middle finger. The fact is that someone's testimony can be enough to secure a conviction, and that is absolutely wrong. Can you imagine, in the UK, if we were able to secure a conviction against someone we don't like on the basis of our testimony? Well, I'd probably be down there right now. There's a few people I would like to report. But the thing is, it's so tempting and luring, even to foreign nationals, when you have a legal system like that, to use it. And that's something that UAE really needs to work on. It's totally abused, and yes, by Emiratis, but by everyone. Yeah. Yeah, okay. All right, well, that was fun, guys. So thank you very much for joining, and enjoy your day, and I'll hopefully see you again soon. Bye-bye.